James McVinnie, welcome to Cultural Attaché.
Hi, thank you very much.
I want to start by asking you about something that Robert Schumann said. He is quoted as having said about the organ. He said, "No other instrument takes such an immediate revenge on sloppiness in composition and playing." I gather you agree
Yeah.
with him, but how do you, as a performer, how do you determine what music won't allow sloppiness from you and doesn't represent sloppiness from a composer?
Well, great question. I mean, the organ was kind of had its zenith in the 17th and 18th centuries, um, when music was all about counterpoint. So, I mean, that was the high point of uh, that kind of style of music making. And there's a kind of utopian ideal to counterpoint that's always appealed to me. I mean, not that I dislike what came after. I mean, who wouldn't love Mozart and Haydn, um, and their composers who are equally close to my heart as Bach? But there's this kind of this idea where you have music made up of voices, and um, the music works on these horizontal axes, and the music the voices interact to create the piece of music, and there's absolute equality of importance. So if you're playing a Bach fugue, for instance, and you take out one note, the whole of the artifice of the expedition falls apart. Um, and so I guess that's so the organ's an ideal instrument for counterpoint. You have this incredibly uniform quality to the sound across the range, so you can hear, every voice as clearly as the other. And of course, the organist has so few variables to make a piece of music sound musical. So you are only dealing with subtleties of rubato and subtleties of touch as well. So, I mean, that's the compositional side, I guess. And from the playing side, I mean, yeah, you there's um, organs can be great fun to play if you're in a great big acoustic, but acoustics can hide one's technical shortcomings. So, with regard to playing concerts in concert halls where the acoustic space is much less, I found that very sort of immediate with the work that I've done over the past few years in those spaces. So yes, there's really nowhere to hide on the organ. Even if you think that an acoustic will cover you up, you're perhaps on the wrong track there.
Now, these concerts that you're doing with both the Los Angeles Philharmonic and with the San Francisco Symphony are part of the California Festival, which is showcasing works by composers primarily written within the last 5 years. How do most of the recent compositions that would qualify for inclusion in that, whether they're included in the festival or not by you or anyone else, represent the future you would like to see in contemporary classical music?
Well, another great question. I mean, the composer whose work I've loved getting to know, I guess most recently, is Gabriella Smith. And her music has this incredible immediacy to it. And, I remember Steve Reich describing her in an introduction to a concert as a force to be reckoned with. And, her music is kind of hits a very kind of deep note in how I think about what music should be and how immediate and how accessible music should be to everyone. I live in England, where there's this kind of different musical ecosystem, somewhat to California. So this kind of difference is something that I'm very, very keen on. But her work is predominantly preoccupied with the climate crisis. And I was watching an interview she did yesterday, actually, online. I'll try and find it so we can link it. what is the point in composing music that has an environmental aspect to it? What good is that when the country's burning? Which is a valid question. But I think, first of all, on a general perspective, I mean, humanity and the arts have been going hand in hand since the year dot. And to lose the arts and humanities, even at our most crisis-induced moments, is just is unthinkable. Gabriella has always been very keen that her music is a kind of call to arms, really, and a kind of way of making these issues that we're faced with very prescient and very immediate. So this organ concerto I'm playing, Breathing Forests, is about the life cycle of a forest. It's in 3 contiguous movements. Grow, breathe, and burn are the 3 movements names. So it's about the kind of natural life cycle of a forest, and fire and forest fire is a natural part of what happens. And of course, this is a kind of commentary on when fire becomes an unnatural part. So it's a kind of lament as a piece for the lost ecosystems. And also, as she says, again, a call to arms to get to work and to do something about this. So I can think of no better way than to ignite imagination in the listener and performer alike. Yeah, I mean, California has always had a special place in my heart for all sorts of reasons. I mean, Terry Riley and Lamont Young being the founders of minimalism, coming from California, there's always been an immediacy to the music making there that I love. So yeah, I'm really happy to be involved.
Now, Breathing Forest, you gave the world premiere of last February. Well, not last February, February a year ago with Los Angeles Philharmonic. The climate crisis has gotten worse since then. The temperatures keep going up all year. So as somebody who cares about the environment and who cares about music, how has your relationship to this particular piece and its message, given what's transpired in those, what it would be 18, 19 months, how has that, changed since you gave the world premiere?
Well, it's just much more immediate, I think. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm sitting here in Devon in England, and there's a storm happening outside. September was the hottest on record. I mean, it really is changing month by month, and I'm 40. I don't have kids, but I fear for the kids that I see around and what kind of experiences they will have to endure as they grow older. Yeah, I mean, it is something that I feel is growing in proportion in people's just a general consciousness over here, certainly, and I mean, of course, that will be the case in the States as well. So yeah, it's very urgent.
You're going to be doing Imaginary Pancake by Gabriella Smith in Los Angeles, which is a piano work that I believe was commissioned for Timo Andres.
That's right.
People, unless they're at both concerts, aren't going to know if there's a conversation that maybe happens between those 2 works. But from a performer's aspect, is there a dialogue that you can see between, say, the solo work of something like Imaginary Pancake and the robust, relationship that the organ has with the orchestra in Breathing Forest?
I mean, one of the interesting things about her music is that there are often seemingly simple cycles and progressions that repeat over time, which I guess has been the way most music has been put together since the year dot. But her version of this is incredibly vital. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I think the music is incredibly approachable from a layperson's perspective. And there are these moments in Imaginary Pancake that use exactly the same kind of grammar and the same kind of language. So yeah, definitely they're kind of companion pieces. But that's true of a lot of her music as well. I was listening to the Requiem, which is an amazing work that she wrote for Roomful of Teeth and String Quintet, I think. And the text for that is all of the names in Latin of all the species that have become extinct over the last 100 years. And then the musical kind of bricks and mortar of that piece is also very similar to what I was just describing. So yeah, very much similar. And just as a point of interest about the title of that piece, Imaginary Pancake, I actually asked her about this over text and said, why is this piece called this? And it dates from when she was a kid on a summer camp. One of her fellow summer camp attendees was this kid who played this Beethoven sonata, and she describes the memory of him playing this as him outstretching his hands to the two ends of the piano and playing as loudly as he could, and then coming into the middle. And Gabriella was saying, actually, I've gone through all Beethoven sonatas and concertos and all of the other incidental music, and she can't find the piece that she remembers. So there's this kind of imagination to the piece. But her work starts with this ferocious kind of toccata style writing with the hands right at the very top and bottom of the keyboard, and that over the first course of the first couple of pages comes into this very beautiful kind of soporific middle section. So yeah, it's a cool title.
Yeah, and having watched the video as you were describing it, I knew exactly where that came from.
Yeah.
You mentioned that music being approachable for a lay person. How important is it for you as a listener or for you as an artist that the music being composed today has that approachability?
I think it is important. I mean, it's important to just sort of talk about the context of me saying that as an English person. I mean, we have as I was saying, we have a very different ecosystem over here. Modernism in Europe happened and has quite a different flavor to the music that grew up after the Second World War in the States. So English contemporary music is incredibly different to that which was written by Philip Glass and Steve Reich in the 60s and 70s. I mean, it's not better. I don't feel like it's any less worthwhile or any more worthwhile, but it comes from a point of a kind of intellectual approach to the music. It's about, I guess this goes back to the second Viennese school and Schoenberg and all of that kind of stuff, where it's the idea behind the composition as much as how it makes you feel, or indeed you could go so far as to say that it's more about the intellectual ideas behind the piece than it is about how it makes you feel. And we've kind of come to remember Nadia Sorotta talking about this, that you can have in MoMA a beautiful chrome modernist chair that's beautiful to look at but not terribly comfortable to sit on. And music, we've got to a point in music where we can have an approachability and an intellectual element, and that can sit by, for want of a better kind of terminology, a prettiness to the music. And Nico Muley's music does all of those things. I mean, it's a very it's very beautiful music to listen to. But it's hugely complex as well, and Gabriella's music as well. Like I was saying, that there's this kind of simplicity to it, or an approachability to it. So yeah, I think it is important. I mean, we have to remember as classical musicians that most people on the street, their idea of music is so different from mine or yours. And not that we should ever dumb ourselves down, but you have to give people a way in, I think, with music, which is really important to me.
Yeah, it's funny how this comes up in a number of conversations that I have with people, and how like a couple generations, prior, they had the benefit of Looney Tunes cartoons and Fantasia to make classical music something that was welcomed in their home, and we don't have that now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Fantasia is, hearing the Toccata and Fugue in D minor really was one of the reasons why I wanted to learn the organ. I mean, the orchestral version was incredible, and it didn't matter that it was the orchestra versus the organ, but it was just this incredible sort of tidal wave of music. Yeah, it's really cool.
In the recital that you're going to be doing, because you have two concerts in Los Angeles, but the first is a recital where you're going to be playing both the monster organ that is the instrument that is at Walt Disney Concert Hall and the piano. What's the conversation that you want to create between the music that you choose to play on each instrument?
So for me, I mean, I grew up as a pianist and an organist, and then the organ kind of took over when I was in my late teens, and I spent the first part of my life playing the organ. I mean, lockdown and COVID, I sort of re-evaluated my relationship to the piano during that time, and kind of fell back in love with it. And despite the fact that there's two very, very different experiences as a listener, they're kind of one and the same to me. I mean, the piano and the organ are very, very similar. I mean, the piano is a much more tactile pursuit as an instrument to play. You have absolute control over everything you're doing in a moment's notice. The organ is much more complicated in that sense, and of course does things the piano can't do, and vice versa. So what I want to do is what I've done in putting together this program is try to kind of have the music has the most important thread through the recital, and have a sequence and program of music, and it's sort of in my mind irrespective of the instrument that I'm playing on. So I'm actually playing an organ piece on the piano, and I'm playing a piano piece by Meredith Monk on the organ. So I wanted to kind of play around with this idea of what we think of as being the idealized instruments for the music. So yeah, it's a kind of weird, well, not a weird, but just a walk through my own kind of personal personality. And then the second half, I'm playing music entirely by Philip Glass, and there I'm using the organ rather like a synthesizer. So I'm playing music in fifths, which is a piece that dates from the 1960s that he wrote for his own ensemble made up of farfisas and flutes and saxophones. And it's possible to play that piece of music as a soloist on the organ, but you use the organ in a way which kind of is a nod to the kind of sound world of that very austere world. So yeah, there are lots of kind of ways of circumnavigating people's expectations, which I try to do with my programming and the instruments that I play. So yeah, that's the long and short of it.
Well, and I like the album that you released where you went back and forth between Glass and Bach, because
sure, yeah.
I've always thought that it was easy to see a through line between the two of them.
Definitely. I mean, Philip's music, it has the same kind of economy to what I was talking about at the beginning of this, about counterpoint. I mean, and I called the record Counterpoint for that reason. If you take one of the etudes on the piano by Glass and you take one note away, it's the same kind of effect. The artifice of the music completely disintegrates. So it has a real integrity to it. And also, I mean, I suppose, I chose for that recording movements from the Art of Fugue and, the C minor Prelude and Fugue. There's that kind of intensity to that music, and that kind of immediacy and kind of austerity, for want of a better way of describing that music, which is shared by a lot of this music from the 1960s by Glass as well. So that was another link that I felt.
Right. Now, because you're a massive underachiever, you've chosen to do another world premiere while you're in Los Angeles, which is John Adams' Eden Interstates, and not much has been revealed about that piece. So I was wondering what you could tell us in advance of our being able to hear this, next month.
Yeah, I just correct you. The piece is by Sam Adams,
Sam
who
Adams,
is in fact, but in fact, who happens to be John's son,
right.
and is a wonderful composer. Actually, Sam has written a program note about the piece that kind of explains the title and the instrumentation. But yeah, it's a 3-movement work, around 25 minutes in total. It's scored for organ. It's a kind of, I describe it as an organ concerto for organ and small ensemble. So it's a lot of these concerto works I've been playing have been for big forces, full symphony orchestras. This is for organ, 2 pianos, electric piano, so synthesizer, 2 guitars, 2 percussionists, and brass. So I mean, it's still substantial forces, but it's a very much more kind of intimate affair. So I'm looking forward to being able to use the organ in a slightly more subtle way. I mean, when you're playing a big organ concerto, the power of the symphony orchestra, it has to be matched by the organ. Sam has been incredibly kind of fastidious and incisive and insightful about the way that he's conceived the organ parts, and is after very particular kind of single stop tonalities that you can use in that kind of oral environment when you're just playing with one piano. So yes, it's a chamber concerto, I guess, and it's very cool, and I'm very excited to be putting it together.
Well, I'm definitely hoping I will be able to attend that concert, because that's something
Awesome.
I definitely want to hear.
Yeah.
In a 2021 column for the New York Times, you were asked about the 5 minutes that will make you love the organ. And you said Bach is the ultimate composer for this extraordinary timeless instrument. If you were to determine or posit who amongst composers writing for the organ today is at the top of their game, who would you say it would be, and why?
I mean, I'm biased because all of the composers I've worked with I admire their music, and so I would say, Nico Muhly's music for the organ is incredibly natural. He himself is an organist, and doesn't play very often on the organ these days, but was a chorister and is kind of steeped in that tradition, and comes from a choir background from when he was a kid in Providence, Rhode Island. He understands how the organ works, and it's been very interesting working with other composers who perhaps less familiar with the kind of way in which you write, and the compass of the instrument, and the registrational possibilities. The other people that I work with, Tom Jenkinson is kind of at the other end of the spectrum. He's amazing musician who works and releases music under the name of Square Pusher. So if you're into 90s electronic music, he's a absolutely cult household name, and he's also been obsessed with the organ since he was a teenager. And he comes at composition from a totally unclassical. He doesn't even read music. So he writes music using a 1990s sequencer, and yet the conception for the instrument has been so completely kind of innate and instinctive. I'm just trying to think of the other people that I admire who I haven't worked with. There are several composers over here. I know Cecilia McDowell over here is a wonderful composer for the organ. I admire her music hugely. There's Judith Bingham as well, who has a huge catalogue for the organ. Slightly different musical ecosystem to the one that I work in, but her music is very well worth checking out. And then, of course, there are a few pieces by Arvo Pärt that I love playing. He hasn't written much for the organ, but there are a couple of very, very, everything he writes is so wonderful. But I think his style of music suits the organ very well, and he somehow has sort of got that ability to get to right to the heart of the matter with anything that he does, with the fewest number of possible notes, which is amazing.
Well, I had a feeling you were going to mention Nico Muhly first. I did an interview with Nico in advance of Register having its world premiere at Walt Disney Concert Hall, which I was very thrilled to be
Oh,
in the hall for. And he told me that a lot of the work of that particular piece and the way he approaches it, he leaves room for the organists themselves. He said, if you leave it vague, you can trust the organist to be orchestrator of their instrument. Is Nico's approach unique? And if so, is this the best way for an organist and a composer to collaborate?
well, it's certainly very generous, and it does make my life very much easier. And I think I'd go one step further and say that his music it enables a performer to kind of to kind of set up a line where you are faithful interpreters of the composer's intentions, and also be kind of radical rethinkers of what the composer's written as well. I mean, I've released an album of Nico's music called Cycles, and there's a piece called Fast Cycles on the album. And I sent Nico the master of the thing, and wasn't at the premiere, sadly, of that piece that I gave in London, and I'd not played it to him, and he said, "Oh wow, I'd never thought that the penultimate section could ever sound like that," which was a really lovely compliment, I think. No, it was. But that's me knowing that Nico trusts me, but also I know that he has written with a very specific knowledge of the organ, so he knows what a flute stop sounds like, and he knows what a flute stop with a principal sounds like, and a reed stop and all that kind of stuff. So composers who come, like Tom Jenkinson, for instance, coming out writing, it's useful to have some kind of pointers from a performing perspective as to the kind of intentions that they have in their mind. And actually, Sam Adams, for this piece, I was saying he's been very exacting about the sounds that he's wanted, and he's used it's an organ program with samples library, and he's been able to choose with MIDI mock-ups of the piano as well to decide what kind of timbral, registral things should go in the score. And I've used that as a base in my kind of working out the conception for the registrational scheme, and that's been incredibly useful. And yeah, so it can work in a number of different ways. I mean, I think Messiaen is the obvious example of a composer who writes absolutely specifically for his instrument in La Trinité, and every moment in the score is notated with exactly what stops he wants. And of course, that's the other end of the spectrum, where you, as a performer, have to take all of that with a pinch of salt, because unless you're playing at La Trinité, you have to alter, and you have to sort of try to get there as best you can. So there are problems in all approaches, but yeah, that generous approach is very nice. And the register piece was all about that, really. I mean, the register is a play on words. This is a concerto for organ and orchestra that Nico wrote me back in 2018. Register is the act of registering the piece, and it's about voice registers in speech, and about how they interact. And the piece is written or based on a piece of Orlando Gibbons that we both like. And so there's a kind of registral element in a kind of looking backwards to Tudor England perspective as well. So yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, I have to say that was a really fun day, because if I remember correctly, the performance I attended was an afternoon performance.
Yes.
So I think the first performance was an afternoon performance, and Thomas Otis was in the audience for that. And then Thomas Otis had something going on at the theater at the Ace Hotel, and Nico was there for that concert.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
One last quick question, if I may.
Of course.
French organist composer Charles-Marie Wieder is quoted as having said, "Organ playing is the manifestation of a will filled with the vision of eternity." How would you define your will when you were sitting at the organ bench, and what visions do you have while you're playing about what eternity might be?
Wow, what a question. I mean, I'm someone that doesn't hold any I mean, it sounds like Vidor's talking about his religious faith. I don't know whether he was, but I think it's safe to assume that he was a religious man. Most organists in the 19th century were. I mean, I like liturgy and I like church music. I'm where I stand on the spectrum of faith is a complex issue. I mean, I guess the only thing I can say is the organ is definitely the most transcendental instrument that you can possibly play. And whether you're in a cathedral or in a concert hall or a tiny room playing to your friends, you know, on a 2-stop chamber organ, you know, to those who have a religious faith, obviously it has huge implications for that. And for those who don't, it's still an extraordinary instrument that, I mean, goes to the very heart of who I am, as a feeling as though I'm have a vocation to do what I do. So yeah, it's a wonderful thing.
Well, I think the people who are going to be attending the concerts in Los Angeles and San Francisco are going to get a great cross section of all kinds of opportunities that they can hear, different kinds of music they can hear on the organ, and obviously in Los Angeles on the piano as well.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, definitely.
Terrific. Thank you very much for your time. Have safe travels out to the West Coast of the United States.
Thanks very much indeed.
Are you all right with my posting our conversation online?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Fine. Yes, a really nice conversation. Thank you. Really lovely questions.